Welcome to Middle Math Academy, Adding and Subtracting Decimals, level number 1. This is part of our differentiated series where we have 5 levels of challenge for every topic. Let's get started. Our learning targets today are I can identify keywords and word problems, and I can add and subtract decimals using a model in the standard algorithm. Go ahead and before we get started, rate yourself 1 through 5 on our learning targets. 1 is the least confident, 5 is the most confident. Go ahead and complete our opening, then come back to the video. For our opening, our first image shows 1 whole. So if you're writing this as a decimal, we could just write 1, or you could write 1.0. For our next one, we have 1 out of 10 shaded. So if this were a fraction, I would write 1/10, but it asked us to write a decimal. So to write 1/10, I'll just write a 1 in the tens place. And then for this last image, we have 1 out of 100 shaded. So once again, as a fraction, it would be like this. But if we're writing it as a decimal, like the directions asked us to, I'll write 0.01 with my 1 in the hundredths place. Let's take a look at our notes. Make sure you're writing with me. Our first step in adding and subtracting decimals is to line up your decimals and write them in evenly. A good rule of thumb is to space each number and have 1 pinky's worth of space between each number. You can see on our notes that we have a little example of spreading out our numbers and decimals evenly. Step number 2, write in a 0 placeholder if needed. You can see in this example, originally we were just adding 2, but to keep our decimals lined up, I added in 2 0 placeholders to make sure everything was super neat and organized. Our next step, step 3, is to add or subtract from right to left. So in our example, the first thing I did is I added 5 plus 5. Okay, so you start on the right-hand side, and we'll practice this in just a second. Then when you solve, you're going to bring the decimal straight down. And lastly, step 5 is to use estimation to ensure your answer is reasonable. So in this example right here, we had 2 plus 1.25 plus 1.05, and I rounded each number to the nearest whole number. So I got 2 plus 1, which is 4. That's an easier problem. And because my sum or my answer was 4.30, that tells me I'm on the right track. If I estimated and I got 400 as my original answer, that would be a red flag and let me know I need to go back and check my work. Let's talk about some keywords for addition. Keywords for addition are sum, make sure you're writing with me. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Sum, in all together, total, and increase. And these aren't the only words. These are just some of them. Let's zoom in on some subtraction keywords. And remember, you can always pause the video if you need more time. Subtraction, difference is a huge keyword for subtraction. What's the difference between two numbers? Minus, decrease, subtract, and fewer than. And then lastly, spent. And similarly, these aren't the only keywords, but here are some of them. Let's look at our examples. One of our learning targets is to add and subtract decimals using a model. So we're going to practice that first in example A. I'll zoom in. In example A, it says shade in 1 plus 25 hundredths. And you can see this grid is split into hundredths. So you're going to go ahead and take your pencil, and we'll start by shading in 1 whole. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then we'll shade in our next grid 25 hundredths. So each column or each row is 10. So I can shade in 10, 20, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So altogether, my total shaded region is 1 and 25 hundredths, which I can write as 1.25. As you're working today, you can always come back to these examples and our notes to help you if you need it. Let's look at example B. Example B says find the sum of 3 and 200ths and 4 and 5/10. Okay, let's go ahead and underline sum. That's a key word for adding. Okay, so we know we're going to add. And then I'm going to line up my decimals super neatly. Remember, we want to spread out our numbers with a pinky between each number if you can. So I'll start by writing 3.02. Okay, and then we're going to do 4.5. Maybe it'll help you if you put in your decimal first, and then we write 4.5. Now, in our notes, we talked about putting a 0 placeholder. Okay, so if there's nothing in this spot, we're going to put a 0 to just keep it nice and organized. Now, we're going to start on the right-hand side, and we'll start by adding 2 plus 0. 2 plus 0 is 2. 0 plus 5 is 5. We'll neatly bring down our decimal, and 3 plus 4 is 7. Now, remember, we can use estimation to help us make sure that we're correct. So here's what we got for our answer. If I'm estimating, I can say, okay, well, 3.02, I can round that to 3. Plus 4.5, I can round that to 5. And 3 plus 5 is 8. Is 7.52 close to 8? Yeah. If I had $7.52, that's close to $8. So I'm on the right track. Let's take a look at example C. Example C says, write the difference of 9.45 and 6.51. Okay, well, let's underline difference because that's a key word for subtraction. And a key point here is you want to write the numbers when we're subtracting in the order that they give them. Okay, so since 9.45 came first, we're going to go ahead and write 9, remember, neat, space out your numbers, and 45 hundredths, minus 6, decimal super lined up, and 51 hundredths. And once again, we're going to start on the right-hand side. 5 minus 1 is 4. 4 minus 5. If I had $4, I couldn't spend $5. I wouldn't have enough. So I would need to borrow. So I'm going to go borrow from the 9 and make it an 8. And my 4 will become a 14. 14 minus 5 is 9. Neatly bring down your decimals. And 8 minus 6 is 2. If that felt confusing, just go ahead and rewind and watch one more time. So here's what we got as our answer. Let's go ahead and use estimation to make sure we're on the right track. So if I want to estimate 9 and 45 hundredths, I can round to 9, minus 6 and 51 hundredths, I could round to 7, and 9 minus 7 is 2. If I had $2.94, that is close to $2. Complete the first 2 problems on page 2, then come back to the video to check your work. All right, so the first thing you should have done is shade in 2. So you should have 2 boxes completely shaded in. Then you should have shaded in 36 more boxes to represent the 2 and 36 hundredths. So that's the first part of the directions. And the second part says find the sum using the standard algorithm. So for your standard algorithm, I'll zoom in. You should have it lined up similarly to this. Check to make sure your decimals are one on top of the other, and the sum is 2 and 36 hundredths. Let's check the next problem. In this problem, we have 5 hundredths plus 15 hundredths. So you should have shaded in 5 boxes to represent our first number, and then 15 more boxes. It's okay if you didn't choose the exact same boxes. And then standard algorithm, make sure your decimals are lined up, check your work. Go ahead and complete the rest of page 2 on your own. This video will not go over those problems. Then check in with your teacher to get feedback. Let's look at page 3. On page 3, we're practicing the same thing as page 2. However, we're subtracting now. So whenever we're subtracting and showing it on a model, we're going to start by shading in the first number. Okay, so we're going to shade in 1 and 4 tenths. So let's start by doing that. We'll shade in 1 whole, and then 4 tenths. We'll start by shading in 1 whole and 4 tenths. If you have a highlighter, sometimes that's helpful for this section too, because we are eventually going to cross out as well. Okay, so there's 1 whole, and then each column is 10, so I'm going to shade in 4 tenths. Okay, so step 1, we shade in our first number. Step 2, we're going to cross out our second number. So we are going to cross out 3 tenths. So remember, each box is 100, each row or column is a tenth. So I just crossed out 1/10. If you want to make it a little quicker, you can also do a big X too. Okay, so now I crossed out 3/10 or 3 columns. Your answer is how much you have left. We're still going to show our work using the standard algorithm, but I can see I have 1 whole left and 1/10, 1 and 1/10. But let's go ahead and do the standard algorithm just to practice. 1 and 4/10 minus 0.3 or 3/10. 4 minus 3 is 1. Make sure your decimals are one on top of the other. Boom, 1.1. Go ahead and practice the next one on your own, then come back to the video to check your work. Check your work for our second problem, then complete the rest of page 3. And check in with your teacher to get feedback. Complete the first 2 problems on page 4, then come back to the video to check your work. Check your work for A, make sure your decimals are neatly lined up, and make sure you used estimation to check your answer. Go ahead and check your work for B. Complete the rest of page 4, then check in with your teacher to get feedback. Come back to the video when you're ready for page 5. Complete the first 2 problems on page 5, then come back to the video to check your work. Make sure you're following the directions. Let's go ahead and check our work for A. The first thing you're supposed to do is underline keywords. That was step 1. So our keyword here was total. Okay, and that's a signal for adding. Then step 2 was to solve using this standard algorithm. You should have gotten 13 and 37 hundredths. Make sure your decimals are lined up. And then step 3 was an estimation check where we round all of our numbers and then create an easier problem to make sure we're on the right track. So make sure you did all 3 steps. And then it's always a good practice to just write a sentence that's answering the question. You can take the question and reword it into a sentence. So what's the total weight? The total weight of the vegetables is... Go ahead and check your work for problem B. Go ahead and complete the rest of this page. One thing I want you to remember is we went over some keywords in our notes, but some keywords maybe we didn't go over. So if you don't see keywords that we've already covered, try to figure out what some other keywords are. Come back to the video when you're ready for page 6, and don't forget to check in with your teacher once you finish page 5. Complete all of page 6, then come back to the video to check your work. Go ahead and check your work for our common misconception problem. We're going to check our closing problem step by step. So step 1, make sure that when you did this problem that your decimals are really neatly lined up and you have a 0 placeholder in front of the 3. Our next step is we can't do 5 minus 8. We have to borrow from the 7, make it a 6. And once we borrowed from the number next to us, we get to add 10. So our 5 becomes a 15. Now we can do 15 minus 8 is 7, 6 minus 2 is 4. Bring down our decimal. Make sure you have this part so far. We can't do 1 minus 6. Our number on top can't be smaller. So we need to borrow again. This number goes down by 1, and then we get to add 10 to our number. Becomes 11. 11 minus 6 is 5. Once again, we can't do 1 minus 3, so we have to borrow again. This becomes a 1. This becomes an 11. 11 minus 3 is 8. 1 minus 0 is 1. That was a lot of borrowing, so I just wanted to make sure that we were doing it step by step. Make sure to complete the rest of this page if you haven't. So this problem here, as well as our debrief questions. In your own words, what did you learn today? How much effort did you put in during class? 1 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. And what do you think is a common misconception or a common mistake when students are adding and subtracting decimals? Once you finish answering this page, at the beginning of the day, at the beginning of this lesson, we rated ourselves 1 through 5 on our learning targets. Now that we've gotten more practiced, you're going to go back to page 1 and rate yourself after the lesson. Then get your teacher's initials for page 6 and get feedback. Thank you for joining us today at Middle Math Academy, where we practiced adding and subtracting decimals level number 1. This is part of our differentiated series where we have 5 levels of challenge for every topic. If you're looking for any additional practice, make sure to check out levels 2, 3, 4, or 5. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.